Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you so much for joining as we are about to um, enter, as we are about to discuss a very important matter. Now, this afternoon, we are going to look at let's look at the question, why is Mark Golding silent on Andrew Holness's policies, on the JLP's policies? That's their political policy stance. We're not hearing a lot from Mark Golding. And I would like to suggest 5 secrets to Mark Golding winning the next general election. And I hope that Mark Golding is getting himself ready. Sometimes I'm wondering, do we have a uniparty in Jamaica? Or do we have two distinctive political parties? It seems to me that we just have a uniparty because there is no real opposition against what Andrew Holness and his team rather are doing in Jamaica. Now, let us look at the economy. The economy, I believe, is run by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and other multilateral institutions. Very important that you understand that. And I was trying to pull up this article written by or published in the Jamaica Observer. It was a two-part series in which you had the author did not mention his name, but he says that the economy is on a good path, that the Jamaica's economy is on a good path, and that the Jamaican government is doing very well in shepherding our economy. But the author quoted ad nauseum the assertions coming from the International Monetary Fund. That is how he assessed the economy, not according to research that he had done domestically to see and to interact with the people to see how they were feeling about the economy. But his thesis was based on, and evidence were based on what the International Monetary Fund had to say. And that is not research. For those of you who think that you're intellectuals and you are just, repeating and robotically, saying what the IMF is saying, it means, therefore, that you are not a true intellectual. Yesterday, I was listening to a program by Macmillan, Dr. Macmillan, that is a Jamaican doctor who lives in England. And they were talking about the whole medical infrastructure and how public health has been captured by economic interests. And one of the hosts that he invited on his program, she was suggesting, well, both of them suggested, both of the hosts that he invited his guests on the program intimated that public health has been captured and it is based on economic interests. It's not based on the public's interest. And, they were suggesting that public health workers, professionals have to go out on the ground and they have to interact with the people and see what is happening in people's lives as regards their health. And I would suggest the same thing for our so-called political economic pundits and those who think that only what the IMF suggests and other multilateral institutions suggest should we take into consideration, and that is the reality. And oftentimes that is not the reality. That is not the reality. Now, the article was suggesting that our economic fundamentals are excellent, as they have always been suggesting. Inflation is down. Yes, inflation might be down theoretically, but we are suggesting that the cost of living in Jamaica has increased dramatically, and many people are not able to deal with the high expenses in Jamaica. Recently, there was a publication of a video by a former Jamaican teacher who worked in Canada for many years and seemed now to have retired, and she is now, she's retired in Jamaica, has bought her house and she has settled there. She's complaining that the cost of living, even though she's coming from Canada and, and has a retirement income coming in, but the cost of living in Jamaica is too high. And she's realizing that even though she's also living in a gated community, beyond the gates, she recognizes that there's a lot of need in Jamaica. So we cannot continue to pretend as if everything is okay and everything is fine and dandy in Jamaica, according to what the IMF is suggesting. Because we know that the IMF is a neoliberal institution, and their quest is to destroy, to demolish domestic economies. And I was reading this morning, coming out of the Gleaner, a story that was written by the Antiguan ambassador to the United States. And he was suggesting that, the whole matter of Trump's immigration laws and how, Trump is going to deport those people, those immigrants who are undocumented in the United States. And he begins to say that it is not the right thing for Caribbean leaders to protest against Trump's immigration policy. But what they should do, they should engage in a diplomatic conversation about immigration and its legality or lack of legality, whatever he's suggesting there. But the point he was raising is that every country has its rights to enforce its immigration rules and laws and stuff like that. And it is true what he's saying. What he has left out of the story is that a lot of the policies that came from Washington, D.C. through the IMF and the World Bank and other multilateral institutions have helped these economies to tanker. They have tankered, these policies have tankered these countries' economies, and hence people are moving to the United States. It is not because the United States is that an attractive place to work, to live and to work. For some, it might be, but for many, many people find it to be exhaustive to live and to work there, very stressful. Okay, now if they'd had the opportunities in their countries to remain and to live and to work and to raise families, then they would have stayed in their respective countries. But they have not yet found the means because of the destructive, the toxic policies that have been imposed by the Washington Consensus. And the United States understands that. I was also reading an article that was published by Vox newspaper in the United States, looking at the immigration policies that were crafted by Bill Clinton, which are the genesis of what we're seeing in North America right now. The immigration policies, the draconian immigration policies that Trump is currently enforcing, the genesis of that immigration, those toxic and very draconian immigration policies, were laid during the Bill Clinton administration, during Slick Willie's administration. Absolutely. William Jefferson Clinton, right? That was a time that he actually enforced, well, crafted these or those immigration policies, okay, which helped to have quadrupled, as it were, doubled the immigration, what you call the number of undocumented immigrants in the United States of America. You better believe it. And before Clinton came into office, long before Clinton came into office, do you know that the immigration was under the Department of Commerce and the Department of Labor? It was during Clinton's era, and the laws that he crafted, that his administration crafted, that in which the immigration came now under the remit of this Homeland Security. Well, the Homeland Security was not created under Clinton, it was created under George W. Bush. But that was just a continuation of what Bill Clinton had done, because Bill Clinton was the one who laid the seed, who planted the seeds for the criminalization of the undocumented. Because it's not that difficult to get the undocumented documented. In many cases, it's not that difficult. It's just that the process has made it difficult to weaponize undocumented immigrants and to divide the country so that they can militarize the entire US territory. And that is the agenda, to militarize the entire US territory. That is the fundamental goal that they have, and I hope that you understand that. But the point, I'm not trying to talk about Clinton's immigration policies today. I'm just saying that had the United States not imposed on our sovereign countries, on sovereign Jamaica, on sovereign Trinidad and Tobago. Look at Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana and all the countries in CARICOM. If they desired to have had a relationship with Venezuela to get cheaper oil, why did the United States impose that they can't? They can't do that because if they do that, they're going to be sanctioned. Aren't they sovereign countries? Or are we just vassal states of the United States? I think we are the latter. I think that we're just vassal, we're just mere vassal states of the United States. We like to talk about sovereignty, and the United States is using that word sovereignty when it suits its convenience, right? But they're not talking about sovereign when the Caribbean nations and other foreign countries in Latin America and around the world need to make their own economic sovereign decisions. And of course, the United States is meddling in our economic affairs when she's telling Trinidad that they can't have an oil and gas deal with Venezuela because the United States is suggesting that Venezuela is a terrorist state, or the president Nicolas Maduro is a terrorist, or he's a state sponsor of terror. All of these nonsense that the United States is talking about. Now, what does that have to do with our trying to eke out a plan that is going to work for the people of Trinidad, or work for the people of Jamaica, or the people of Guyana, or the people of any other country, including Antigua? But we have to talk about these things. And in our academic circles, Jamaica, the University of the West Indies, they are not speaking about these very poignant matters. They're not talking about these things. They just like to talk about, the sensational things that do not matter, right? And talking about Trump and not cementing these things into the Bill Clinton era of neoliberalism and what he did with NAFTA and what the IMF has done to have destroyed our economies. This is what the Mark Golding should be talking about. So Mark Golding has to also contextualize what is happening, but they can't, because what is happening is that they are tied to these financial interests. And that is what is happening. So if Mark Golding wants to win the election, he has now to veer away from the propaganda and the lies that we're hearing from the JLP about the economy. And we're hearing that ad nauseum and both papers in Jamaica and all the radio stations and most of the radio stations and the TV stations are saying the same thing. They're literally saying the same thing. No one is trying to dare to be a Daniel and to stand for that which is right and to speak truth to power. So if Mark Golding wants to win, he has to come straight with the people, talk about the destructive policies of the IMF, and that what they're telling us is not really true. It's not true at all. That just lowering your debt and going down to 60% of GDP is going to miraculously put us in the land of milk and honey, and that we're going to be transformed into a first world country overnight. Well, they didn't say that. I'm just using hyperbole here. But the fact is that they're giving us this grand illusion that our economy is going to be all right. When what they have done, they have stalled economic development for the past 10 years in Jamaica, and perhaps more, because when we think about the fact that it was the IMF, even though it was stalled under the Bruce Golding-led administration, but that was coming from 2009. So when we think from 2009 to 2025, right, those are a significant chunk of years that we could have used to have developed our economy. And we have not been able to do that because of the lagging IMF and the fact that we have to be lowering our debt. But lowering our debt for whom? And whose debt is it? And there are lots of political pundits, economic pundits out there who are suggesting that this whole debt-ridden economy is deliberate, is intentional, and that what they want to do, the more you're indebted and the more you have to pay down your debt, is a more billionaire class that you create. So debt stands at the hallmark, it's a foundation for the creation of more wealth for the oligarchs. It's not wealth for you. It's the extraction of wealth from the working class to the elites of society, to the upper class. That's what they're doing. They're not trying to help you. And that is why they're taking away money from schools, from hospitals, from the construction of roads and other basic amenities. That is what the IMF does. And if we're not constructing schools, if we're not constructing new hospitals, if we're not investing into education the way in which we ought to invest in education, then we are going to be lagging behind in our roads, right? In our roads that are in deplorable condition at the moment. Well, we understand that he's trying to fix them, but the fact of the matter is that they have already been decayed. And every time you see a picture coming out of Jamaica, you have to hold your head down in shame, because most of the roads are in horrible condition. And you really wonder what the tourists think about us. But I think that Mark Golding has to now come straight with the people and say what is the real story behind the IMF. And those who are at the University of the West Indies, who tend to lie PNP, the guy there, what's his name? Who is the economic lecturer at the University of the West Indies. He needs to, and his other team, need to give us a historical understanding of the IMF and IMF's policies. We can't just say because of the JLP has devastated our economy. That's not true. Both parties follow strictly. They adhere to the tenets of the rules set by the International Monetary Fund, which have destroyed the Jamaican economy and will continue to do so if we do not speak out. We've got to speak up and say and call a spade a spade. Call sin by its rightful name. Now, the understanding of crime. We know that crime has been embedded in the Jamaican culture for years. In fact, I think Jamaica, the country, is synonymous with crime. The first things that people think about, apart from thinking about Marcus Garvey and, well, they don't even think about Marcus Garvey when they think about Jamaica first, because, an intellectual of the standard of Marcus Garvey, many people don't think he's coming from Jamaica, right? But they think about Bob Marley, Usain Bolt, because all they think and they associate Jamaica with entertainment and crime, that the country is not safe, and that we have some wonderful singers like the Vybz Kartel. I noticed that Vybz Kartel is being banned, it seems, from Trinidad and from Guyana, right? He's being banned. They don't like the music, the lyrics that he is promoting, and they don't want him in their country. But Jamaicans are proud of him. And they're proud to go to their New York and they sing and dance and all of the vulgar lyrics that he is, promoting. We love that. And yet we complain about the vulgarity and the violence that we see in Jamaica. Look, the other day you had a nurse who seemed to have been blocking the car of this businessman, and he got out of the car and there was an argument that was ensued afterwards, and he began to use his arm, his pistol, right, to beat her, to assault her physically, a businessman. So when we think about crime and violence, sometimes we tend to look at the people at the bottom, at the lower stratum of society. But we have also business people and people in the upper echelon of society who practice violence, who are sometimes more violent than the man coming from. Some of the most violent and vicious people are the ones in jacket and ties and who are sitting in boardrooms. The most vicious and violent people they are. And while the PDTV thing is being talked about on the media, if you are following what is happening, and even before what had happened, if you understand the music industry and the sports and all of these industries and see the people who are up there controlling these industries, the entertainment industry in general, you'd understand that these are some of the most vicious criminals that you can ever sit with and have a dialogue with. And it all involves sex and drugs and all of these things. And that is why we see the lore that comes with it. People are enamored by what they see. And they don't understand that some of these people, like particularly in the music industry, are selected. It's not that they are so talented as some people think they are, but they package them in a way that you think they sound and you begin to dance and, but they are spreading an agenda that is toxic and that is meant to destroy our civilization. So people like the likes of the Vibes Cartel, he's there to spread, he has an agenda. An agenda has been given to him, and it has been given from those on high. So if you're following him and you think he's just independent and he is demonstrating, artistic independence, as it were, if you think that that is what he's doing, if you don't understand that this man has an agenda controlled by very powerful forces, you are living in a wilderness. You are living in a desert by yourself. You don't understand how this world operates. So we are silent on the matter of crime and violence. Are SOEs effective? Are they really bringing the murder rate down? And this morning, there was a gentleman who wrote an article in the Jamaica Gleaner. I was trying to pull it up, but I couldn't also on my computer, in which he was suggesting, according to him, because he's doctor, he's PhD, and he thinks that that is going to, intimidate Jamaicans. And I'm sure the Jamaicans are going to be intimidated by a PhD. He's putting a PhD back beside his name. But the article was nonsense about the whole matter of SOEs, and the fact that based on his quantitative research, based on the data that has been given to Jamaicans, and based on the fact that he has collaborated with the University of Florida, I think that's what a university there in Florida, yes, that he collaborated with to have done a research on Jamaica, and he can see that the SOEs, while they are not long-term, it's not a long-term strategy, but it is for short-term, it is actually reducing crime. And that is what he's saying. And he's making this analogy with removing a fan from a hot room. And the fact that when the fan is removed and the winds, you're not feeling the wind anymore, that you understand that there's something has been removed. I mean, that is the sort of basic thinking, and thinking that, using this analogy with something as potent and as entrenched as crime and violence, which is a social, cultural problem, we can use simply a fan. You can experiment with a fan or a lack of fan in a hot room. That is nonsense. That is nonsense. And I'm not sure where you got your PhD, but that is utter rubbish. And this is what is coming out of our universities. It's not I'm blaming him, it's that he is a victim of what is coming out of our universities. That our universities are not training minds to look at complex situations and understand that you can't use a simple thing like a fan in a room to explain what is happening with crime and violence in Jamaica. It can't. There's no comparison. I wouldn't even have gone there. But to him, I'm sure that it suits him, and his article is going to be well received by many Jamaicans who think, yes, definitely Andrew Holness is doing a great job in implementing SOEs, because they are simply, a great tool of reducing crime and violence in the short term. And that is not true. That is not true. What it is doing is taking away our liberties, our civil liberties, because they are acclimatizing your minds. Because we have been doing the state of emergencies since 2018. And let me just here offer a caveat. I don't have any significant problems. Again, sometimes we might have to impose SOE on a particular situation. Like, for example, what was happening with the DUS, right? But that was unusual. It was an extraordinary event. It was not something that was normal in Jamaica to have the police and the gangs and the shooting at the state, and they were in conflict there. We could see that that would pose a threat to the citizens' lives, and you have to shut them down. I mean, I understand that was so, and it had to be used. right? I understand these cases are on these extraordinary cases. I understand that they might have to call upon the emergency situation like the SO, like an SOE, to deal with that level of extraordinary event. But to suggest to me that this is going to be every time there is a flare up of violence, you're going to just impose SOEs on citizens' lives, that is not going to work because it's a soft lockdown, if you will. And we saw what happened during the lockdowns that many Jamaicans suffered. Many Jamaicans suffered, and they have had irreparable social and economic harms. Irreparable, irreparable, psychological harms also, which we have not assessed because we just like to move on. We just do things and we move on. We don't look back at what is happening. And we see the first world countries doing the same because Dr. Macmillan was suggesting on his program yesterday that one of the problems he's having with this COVID thing is that nobody seems to be assessing what really took place and the consequences of the decisions that were made, even in the United States and these industrialized countries. So nobody really knew what happened. Nobody really knows, I should say, what happened, right? And if the policies were effective or ineffective. What we're still hearing, is that they did a great job. They did a great job under what circumstances. But what we do know is that a lot of our civil liberties were trampled upon and we are not going to get them back. Because once the government has taken away some of your liberties, they will not be returned. They will not be returned. And yesterday I was also listening to, well, not listening, but I read a comment that because I published a video about the whole Jamaica Teaching Bill Council, and she was telling me that the government, Jamaicans are dark and illiterate, so the government has to lead. So let the government lead. That is not what the whole matter of democracy is all about. And if we think the government should lead and the citizens should not think for themselves and challenge the government, then we, the people, deserve tyranny. We deserve a tyrannical state. And that is what we're moving into that direction if we do not take the right steps. And these are things that the Mark Golding should be doing, challenging Andrew Holness's SOEs and saying what he will do, to reduce crime and violence and to keep Jamaicans safe and make Jamaica a place to live and to work and grow families. But at this juncture, he seems to be clueless as to what policy he's going to use to curb crime. And don't tell me about, I don't want, the opposition to know. They already know because they talk among themselves. They are friends. Don't let them fool you. They go to the same parties. They have the same friends and associates. And that's why you see, for example, people like Mark Wignall, he will tell you some of the gossips that he hears because he sits among them in their rum shop and at their parties and wherever he goes, right? And they all talk in their drunk state and they also exchange ideas and stuff like that. So Jamaica is too small for Mark Golding to fool us up that he doesn't want to share his policies with the opposition because he is afraid that they will copy them. That is nonsense. We know that they all know each other and they are friends behind the scenes, even though they're opposition politically, even though the opposition is just to oppose, it's not to really develop. It's not really it is not a credible party. We don't have credible oppositions in Jamaica, right? It's just oppose to oppose. The whole matter of education, which I spoke about, the Jamaica Teaching Bill, I think that the opposition needs to address this whole concept because Andrew Holness is seeking aggressively to push it through the Senate, the Jamaican Senate, and it needs to be addressed. And I think that Mark Golding needs to be clear about what this Jamaica Teaching Bill is about and its agenda and how this could erode the autonomy of our teaching institutions. He needs to talk about these things. These matters are of concern to Jamaicans, right? These matters are of concern to Jamaicans. And you know, whether we like it or not, the Jamaica's academy, the university, and perhaps maybe at the secondary level, I don't know, maybe more so at the university level, tends to align themselves with the PNP, the People's National Party. So that's a great time now to sort of go there and talk about, address the whole Jamaica Teaching Council bill and what the ramifications and consequences for the Jamaican educational system. I think he needs to address these very serious matters. Another question about education too that we see Andrew Ford is pushing, and he's pushing towards having buses to bus our children to school, and that's an excellent idea. But who's going to pay for it? Who's going to maintain these buses and, you know, gas it up and all of these things? Nutrition also is on the agenda to feed our children at least one meal per day. We need to know who is also going to take care of that and how is it going to be maintained, because we like to do these little things because it's election is in the air, and then afterwards Jamaicans have to suffer the consequences. We see this huge bill that we had, huge debt that we have to pay down, and then not only do we have to pay the debt down, but these programs are going to be cancelled. Look at the JLP when they were in power, and the train. Remember the resuscitation of the train under Mike Henry? And then that was great. It was a great move to sort of, because he had a very bold vision to have Jamaica interconnected with multimodal ways of transportation, right? But at the end of the day, we found that the debt went up and the trains afterwards stopped working and all of that nonsense, because the PNP we were so much in debt and we could not afford to continue the trains. I think some of them have been restored. I don't know, but I'm just giving you that analogy, that comparison, that we have to be careful with them telling us that they're going to feed our kids and then they abort it when the other party gets into power, because they're going to say that, oh, we have to pay down our debt, or we don't have enough money to do that. So we must know that whatever we're doing is a bipartisan effort, and we know how the money is going to be injected. We know where the money is coming from, and that this can be like a 10-year, 20-year plan that can be maintained. And we know how it is going to be financed. I think that Mark Golding needs to address these points. He's not addressing these points. 100 buses. Are 100 buses sufficient to bus our children to school? Or do we need more buses? And what is a plan to increase the number of buses for school children? We need to hear from Mark Jefferson Golding. Now, healthcare is another thing that he needs to address. We have a lot of concerns about the healthcare system, and we hear a lot of horror stories coming out of Jamaica. A lot of horror stories about the healthcare system in Jamaica. And we also see where the nurses are leaving in droves, or healthcare professionals are leaving. They are exhausted and they are not properly remunerated. So I think that Mark Golding needs to give us a vision of where if he becomes prime minister, what is his long-term plan, short-term and long-term plan for the healthcare infrastructure, a very critical element of our nation, of our development. Because if our people are not healthy, you can't have a developed nation. If our people are not healthy and have access to good quality health care, you cannot have a developed nation. Neither can you have a developed economy. They must have access to some amount of quality health care. And we often overlook healthcare. I don't know for why. And education. Is that they're just there. And the only time they get attention is when things are collapsing. When the infrastructures are collapsing, the roofs are leaking, and or the teachers are protesting, or the nurses are protesting for wage increase. A lot of time, that's the only time that we give any attention to our education and healthcare sectors. We've got to do better, because if we do not have an educated workforce, then we cannot be developed. And at this moment, Jamaica does not have a largely educated workforce. So all of this thing about our economy is doing well, that is just food for thought. It's not true. It's food for thought. And it would be good food for thought if we were thinking about it and reflecting on the fact that that cannot be true. Because we don't have, neither don't we have, or neither do we have, I should say, a an educated populace, nor do we also have a, what you call it now, a healthy society. We don't have a healthy society. We don't have a healthy society. And if the populace is not educated, if the populace is not a healthy populace, then we know that our economy is not safe. And then the brain drain, they leave. Both professionals from those two very important sectors are leaving every year in droves. So I think that Mark Golding needs to address these matters. He has to say, what is he going to do to reduce crime? That's number one. Very important that he understands that. What is he going to do to develop the economy, to lower the cost of living, that Jamaicans can actually go to the supermarket and buy what they need? We're not talking about now, luxurious items, right? We're talking about basic items that Jamaicans cannot afford. Toilet paper. You're talking about water. You're talking about flour, rice, chicken, just basic staples and basic necessities that people do need. And they find it very difficult to afford, because of the cost of living in Jamaica is just astronomical. And people coming from first world countries are alarmed. They are flabbergasted at what they see in our supermarkets, and they're comparing the dollar, the US dollar or Canadian or the pound sterling. And when they make the comparisons, Jamaicans get offended. Oh, life is hard everywhere. Why are you complaining? When I go to New York, things are expensive. Yes, they are expensive. But when you think about Jamaica and the fact that we're importing everything, and that the importation costs is going to be passed on to the consumer because we're importing everything, then what do you expect? And that is what is going to happen in America right now with the whole matter of the increasing tariffs, right? The cost will be passed on to the consumer. And when the IMF goes to Jamaica and devalue our currency, which they do, that is one of their policies, to devalue our currencies. That is what is going to happen. They benefit at the expense of Jamaicans. Now, we talked about the whole matter of education. Get going with that. And we need to hear more about the buses, and the PNP government needs to unearth, needs to unmask whatever deceptions that might be in that policy, in that busing policy, in that nutrition policy. They must say where the money is coming from and who will continue to pay for these things at this given moment, particularly during a very austere IMF program. And I understand we're now 65% of GDP, based on the article I read in the Jamaica Observer this morning. So it means, therefore, that we have a bit to go, 60% of GDP. And after, what happens next? After reaching 60% of GDP, are we going to have access now to the monies to build Jamaica? Or are they going to tell us that we have to go down to 50% of GDP? So the healthcare and all of these things, if Mark Golding can look at these factors, these 5 secrets: healthcare, education, the economy, crime and violence, and the next thing, to proffer his policy stance in terms of solving these very big problems and issues that we have in Jamaica. I think that he stands a good chance of winning. But if he does not, if he remains silent and does not address these very fundamental, these big and larger than life issues, he is going to fail. He is going to lose to the Andrew Holness-led administration. I hope he understands that, because he's just too silent. And you just can't just go on stage and dance and whine and sing reggae songs. Because I think Marky G is also trying to, in his own way, a form of non-verbal expression, non-verbal communication. He's trying to connect with Jamaican society to tell the people that I'm Jamaican, but we know you're Jamaican, right? So what we need you to do, sir, is to address these problems, these issues, and they're long-standing issues with substance. We want to hear substance. We don't want to hear just a lot of words. We want to see action, not a bag of mouth. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe. Like the videos. The videos can be shared with as many people on the platform. See you in another video. Hasta luego.